Hello, hello, welcome everybody. Hello. Thank you. Thank you. I want to also send a big shout out to all the people that are tuning in online as well. So thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 2023 Joint Conference of the Society for Economic Botany and Society of Ethnobiology. I'm Dr. Cassandra Quave. I'm your local organizer, and I'm so honored to welcome you here to Emory University. I want to take a moment to thank our incredible team of volunteers, staff, and society business officers that have spent not only the past year pulling us together, but really hustling in the past week, and especially since we started the conference. So for all the staff, and I know some of them are still actually working away to make your banquet a beautiful event, but for those that are here, please stand up so you can be recognized. Let's give you a round of applause. There's some. No one standing. Stand up. Okay, I think many of them are still heavy at work. Okay. So our theme this year is human and planetary health. Everything is connected. In a rapidly changing world, a deeper appreciation of the human-nature interface has never been more important. I'm thrilled to welcome you all as experts speaking on the topics of phytochemistry, psychedelics, traditional medicine, ethnopharmacology, conservation, community-based conservation, and agroecology in the future of food. Throughout the conference, we're going to be examining the connections between human and planetary health, including sustainability, ethical engagement with Indigenous communities, and the impact of natural products on human health and therapeutic development. Now, the Emory University, got multiple things here. Okay. The Emory University motto is "The wise heart seeks knowledge," and I just love that motto, because that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to seek knowledge, we're here to share knowledge with one another and address these intersections. I'm really thrilled to tell you that we have a tremendous turnout this year. We have 311 people from 37 countries. Fantastic, fantastic. This is just so important, especially when we're addressing these topics of human health and planetary health, because it all is one health. It's the health of our world and of nature and everything that it entails. I want to also thank and acknowledge the Emory conference team and the Emory technology team and the folks that have helped us with staging and all the logistics that have made this all possible. And importantly, I also want to thank our sponsors, because without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to put on such an incredible event. So if you meet with folks that are here on representing their different companies, please give them a warm thank you, because they're really what helped us to keep our registration rates down, and also to give us some great food and some great travel awards for students, and so on. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm going to now introduce our next speaker. It's my honor to introduce Sierra Talavera-Brown. She is a recent Emory graduate. And why don't you come up to the stage? Yeah, thank you.
Hello, do Sierra Yanishye, Haltsui Bashishchin. Hello and welcome, my friends and relatives. My name is Sierra Talavera-Brown. I am Dene, Navajo, and I'm born for Meadow people. My family is from a small community near Gallup in New Mexico on the Navajo Nation. I am always incredibly grateful for the opportunity to acknowledge the original caretakers, teachers, and storytellers of this land, the Muskogee Creek people, whose sovereignty precedes all. This land is infused with the spirit and life of their people and culture. The people, language, stories, and knowledge were created here and nourished the land through reciprocal relations. I have had the honor of welcoming my relatives back to the homelands and feeling the harmony and rejoice of the earth, its flora and fauna, as they feel the presence of the Muskogee people, energy, and language. Through cultivating relationships with Muskogee community members, I have learned how crucial it is that they are the tellers of their own stories and histories, and the teachers of their knowledge and ways of knowing. Throughout this week, I encourage you to listen deeply and hear the wisdom and medicine that is embedded in Indigenous stories and knowledge. Acknowledge Indigenous contributions as they are all around us. Create and honor space for flourishing of Indigenous knowledge. Commit to reciprocal solidarity and work that disrupts cycles of dispossession and exploitation. Reflect on your part in this story. I will now read Emory's official land acknowledgement statement, which I view as a point of reference for meaningful action. Emory University acknowledges the Muskogee Creek people who lived, worked, produced knowledge on, and nurtured the land where Emory and Oxford and Atlanta campuses are now located. In 1821, 15 years before Emory's founding, the Muskogee people were forced to relinquish this land. We recognize the sustained oppression, land dispossession, and involuntary removals of the Muskogee and Cherokee peoples from Georgia and the Southeast. Emory seeks to honor the Muskogee Nation and other Indigenous caretakers of this land by humbly seeking knowledge of their histories and committing to respectful stewardship of this land. Mado, thank you. Now we will hear from Provost Bellamkonda.
Thank you, Sierra. Welcome, everyone. Leaders and members of the Society of Economic Botany, Society for Ethnobiology, members, delegates of both societies, our distinguished keynote speaker, Wall Kimmerer, welcome to all of you. Welcome to Emory University. Welcome to our university, our home, and this special place. As Sierra just said, before it was our special place, it was a place others called home, including the Muskogee peoples, and we're grateful. We're grateful stewards of this place today, and we invite you, our guests, to make this your place today and for the next few days. We at Emory have tried to make this place a place of gathering, not just any gathering, a place where people gather and where wise hearts seek knowledge, as Cassandra just said. And I hope that the knowledge we seek leads to wisdom to serve humanity. I noticed the theme of this meeting, human and planetary health, everything is connected. When I first read that, I was like, wow, what an insightful theme. It exhorts us to do something. It exhorts us to look afresh. I grew up in the East. I grew up where nature and humans led at that time. I'm young, but not that young, led intertwined lives, where I remember distinctly banana leaves serve as dining plates, where jute fibers made beds and carpets, where cotton made clothes. Ayurveda was a dominant form of medicine based on plants, and of course, a diet that was primarily vegetarian. That India has changed. We have plastic waste as an affront to planet Earth there, just as it is here. But the idea that we are one, that harming the earth or one another is harming oneself, was all around me when I was growing up. For the past 34 years, I've had the honor and pleasure of living in this country, the citadel of modern science and medicine. My own research is in pediatric brain tumors. We run a lab that's funded by the National Institutes of Health and National Cancer Institute. And we've had an explosion, a revolution in medicine of reductionist science, where I have a feeling, eagerly celebrated the accounting of the parts, but neglected the connections between the parts, whether it's in molecular biology, or us as humans, or nations, or us and nature. So I'm delighted that the theme of the conference is what it is, and that this conference and the conversations that will ensue about how everything is connected, particularly us and as humans and nature and the plants around us, are germane. It is also significant that we gather here today at Emory University, where we have the honor of His Holiness Dalai Lama of being a distinguished university professor. The president and I had the honor of visiting with him this past December. And if you visit Dharmasala, one thing you do notice is it's not just the monastery, but there's a whole exiled people that live there with trying to preserve desperately a culture, a society, a way of being, knowledge, books in exile. And despite that setting, what was evident to me when we met with His Holiness was the twinkle in his eye, joy in his heart, and a deep sense of compassion. Compassion towards others, towards the planet, towards all around. And perhaps I wish you and your work to be suffused with such compassion, not just during this conference, but when you leave. Your work is important, work of discovery, to question norms, to share ideas. Thank you for choosing this wonderful place, some of us call home, Emory University, as your meeting site. Thanks to your work and the shared work here, may we see more of the unseen connections that at the end than we did before the conference began. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful conference. It is my pleasure and to introduce to you the president of the Society of Economic Botany, Wendy Applequist. So welcome to Emory again. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Society, I'd like to thank Dr. Bellamkonda for that warm welcome, for coming to us this evening, and Emory University and all of its hardworking staff and student volunteers, and especially, of course, Dr. Quave's indefatigable organizing for putting together what promises to be a meeting that will be remembered for decades. Between our generous sponsors, our brilliant keynote and plenary speakers, our skilled workshop organizers, our numerous scientific contributions from the members of two societies, this proves to be a particularly excellent meeting, one that I'm really excited about. We have many new faces with us, and I hope that all of you will find so much of interest here to you that you'll make a permanent home with one or both of our societies. The Society for Economic Botany has some big news. For the past year, we've been preparing to change the name. We've been Society for Economic Botany since 1959. And this Thursday at the business meeting, we will become the Society for Ethnobotany. We will be celebrating that all week. At 7:30 tonight when the dinner starts. There will be a sparkling beverage of your choice toast. There will be a birthday cake for the society at the dessert night event. You don't have to be signed up for an IDA session to come and share the cake. We have for decades been a big tent society where all forms of ethnobotany, economically related or not, have been welcomed, and this name change just formalizes that, modernizes our name and presentation, and proves that that's what we want to be. But economic botany has been termed the science of survival, and what is that if not the use of traditional knowledge to help humans to sustainably use plants to meet their needs, whether for food, for shelter, fuel, medicine for new and old diseases, spiritual well-being, or artistic expression. The society deals with people who work on all of those things, and the kinds of research you do, the kinds of knowledge you preserve or generate or share or study have the potential in the polycrisis that our world is facing in the coming decades to save human lives, and equally importantly, to save the lives of some portion of the other living things with whom we share our world. And as the conference theme says, everything is connected. This makes your work particularly important, but we work better when we're all together and networked than standing apart. Just like trees in a forest work better because they're all connected under the ground. So when we build connections among ourselves, can we do more to help the world get through this time and improve and preserve what's important about our human cultures than any of us or all of us can do standing alone. So one of the great things about this meeting is the diversity of people we can meet and learn from, generate and take home new ideas, new knowledge, and perhaps new collaborators to build new nodes in our web. This is a really exciting opportunity, and it's wonderful that we can have this chance to do this. It's such an excellent meeting on such a beautiful campus. We are very fortunate and very grateful. And on behalf of the Society, I thank you all. Now it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Daniela Shebitz, the incoming president of the Society for Ethnobiology, with whom we are lucky to be sharing this meeting.
Hi, everyone. Wow, we are here. After a year of planning and collaborations and meetings over Zoom, we're finally here. And there's an amazing week that is right in front of us, filled with fantastic sessions and opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to be inspired and to do the inspiring. And before we get there, I would like to take a moment of gratitude. And I want you to think about the people who made it possible for us to be here physically together or through Zoom, whether it's people watching your kids while you're here or your pets or who inspired you to be here. Thank you for this idea, Ashley, right? Yeah, so moment of gratitude before we go on. Thank you. And I also want to get you in the mind frame that this is going to change you. My first conference changed me, and so has every conference since then. So I first went to my first Society of Ethnobiology conference when I was just finished my undergrad because of my wonderful mentor, who I'll introduce in a moment. And I had only heard and read about the ethnobiologists that I met there, and meeting them in person and talking about research and getting inspired by them really transformed who I was and who I would become. And so I'm excited to have that experience for so many people here throughout this week. An enormous part of what makes the Society of Ethnobiology so powerful and meaningful as a community and a family are its people. And I am very humbled to be following Liz Olson, who has been our president for the past few years through this time of a worldwide pandemic and a lot of other chaos, right? And so she really kind of led my way, and I'm grateful to her. She's joining us virtually. I'm also very grateful to Cheryl Takazaki, who is our office manager and who handles everything major and minor that comes our way, and to Ashley, who is our conference planner and organizer. And every time there's a chaotic email, she has already responded. So thank you for that. And to all of the other board members of our Society of Ethnobiology. What has been most amazing to me this year has been being able to witness Cassie Quave and her ability to handle a gazillion things at once with such ease and grace. While we were planning this conference, she was out gallivanting literally around the world, collecting data, forming relationships, inspiring people, and also somehow here on campus, inspiring people here and everywhere else. So you are an inspiration and really an amazing leader, and it's been an honor to work with you and your entire team on this conference. So a moment for her. So I really hope that we all enjoy this week that we have together. And I hope that you leave Atlanta with many new friends, memories, ideas, and desires to become part of our professional societies. And now I'm shifting, and I'm going to very happily introduce you to our keynote speakers tonight. It is my great honor, first and foremost, to introduce Robin Wall Kimmerer to you today. Robin is a mother, a grandmother, a decorated professor, and enrolled member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. And I first met Robin when I was just a freshman at SUNY ESF back in 1994. I walked into her botany class thinking I was going to be a wildlife biologist. And after one lecture, my life was changed. And that set forward my entire trajectory. Robin immediately opened my eyes to a world that I had been surrounded by my entire life, but I never really appreciated. She opened my eyes to the wonder of nature, and she really showed me that the plants, the animals, the soil, the water, we are all inextricably linked, and they are our relatives, and we need to treat them as such. And she not only did that for me, she has done that for every person that she has had the honor of meeting, and that then who has read her great writings. She has changed my mind in really understanding how our existence would not be possible if we did not start treating the world with that respect. Indeed, our minds, our bodies, and our spirits are all inextricably linked to theirs. At a university that was really rooted in Western science and data, Robin challenged everybody to think in a different way and to incorporate the indigenous knowledge that of the people who have co-evolved the land that we were occupying, and to really understand the connections that were there. I was fortunate to continue through my master's degree studying sweetgrass with Robin as my mentor. But before I did, she told me that I needed to join the Society of Ethnobiology, that I needed to be enriched by others in the field. And she wanted me to really get to know the different perspectives that made our society so great. So I did, and now I'm humbled to stand in front of you as the incoming president. Our first publication was through the Journal of Ethnobiology, and it was my first time integrating Western and Indigenous knowledge. She continues to inspire countless others and continues to live and work in Syracuse, New York, where she's a SUNY distinguished teaching professor of environmental biology. She's the founder and the director of the Center for Native Peoples and Environment, whose mission is to create programs which draw on the wisdom of both Indigenous and scientific knowledge for the shared goals of sustainability. Robin has influenced countless lives through her teachings, her writings, and her passion. She reminds us that the world is a gift and has inspired us to connect with the natural world through gratitude and wonder, through her poetry and her insightful prose. Many of us were introduced to Robin through her amazing book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants, which has earned her wide acclaim and is on the New York Times bestseller list, the Washington Post, the LA Times bestseller lists. But her first book, Gathering Moss, which is also right outside, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses, was awarded the John Burroughs Medal for Outstanding Nature Writing. Her other inspirational work has appeared or been featured in many publications, including The Guardian, Emergence, Orion, Whole Terrain, the New York Times, numerous scientific journals, and podcasts. And just last year, Robin was named the 2022 McArthur Fellow. And with her recognition, I'm going to quote you, she explained that she is working to create a respectful symbiosis between Indigenous and Western ecological knowledges for care of lands and cultures. She continued to explain that biodiversity loss and the climate crisis makes it clear that it is not only the land that is broken, but our relationship to the land. Both are in need of healing, and both science and stories can be a part of that cultural shift from exploitation to reciprocity. Robin, thank you not only for educating us, but for inspiring all of us to play a role in that cultural shift. Today, Robin is joined by Pamela Spalding, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. She is interested in the applications of ethnobotany and ethnoecology to support the resurgence of Indigenous legal orders. She has a long-standing research engagement with the Sauk Nation, located in the Salish Sea region. She is currently working on a book which develops her doctoral dissertation on plant knowledge, Salish women's relationships with plants and customary legal relationships. She is also joined today by Lindsay Burroughs. Lindsay is an assistant professor at Queen's University Faculty of Law. She practiced environmental law and Indigenous law on the west coast of Canada. She is Anishinaabe and a member of the Chippewa-Nawash First Nation, and a mother of 2 young daughters. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Pamela is also a mother. Sorry about that. It is my great honor to introduce the 3 of you and to welcome you to the podium.
If you turn on the microphones, I can do that for you as well.
Oh, technology. It is our friend. It's nice that we can stream this to friends everywhere. This is great.
And then it's just.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out. Oh, wait, they're not seeing this. They're not seeing the things. All right, great. Thank you so much. Ani, bonjour. Shabadas gegish kokwe nadeshnakas. Bodwe wadmi kwenda. Megazedo dem minwa makodo dem. Shishabanyak ne bendegwes. Mikwech kinekego gamijang. In our beautiful Potawatomi language, I give you greetings and tell you that I'm a member of the Bear Clan and of the Eagles, and I give you all gratitude for this opportunity to be together. And let us begin with our first responsibility as human people, which is for gratitude, for this opportunity to be together, for the efforts of the many, many who made this possible, for the safe journeys that brought each one of us here, and for those who we left at home. Gratitude for the first peoples of this place, the Muskogee nations, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of land, of history, of land, of language, of science, of philosophy, and certainly of knowledge of how it is that we care for our more than human relatives. Together, we offer gratitude for the privilege as ethnobiologists of our shared work, the true privilege that we have of exploring these ideas together, for this wonderfully supportive community and for its vision. And as we gather to give gratitude for the people and gratitude for the land, can we commit ourselves to live in such a way with reciprocity that the land and the people will be grateful for us in return? May our work as ethnobiologists be in service to that commitment. Our theme this evening, as an echo of your broader theme of connection, is the covenant of reciprocity, envisioning justice for the land. We'll see them soon enough. This agreement between land and people, this covenant, is simultaneously ecological, and it recognizes that ecological integrity arises from reciprocal exchanges, what systems ecologists might call negative feedback loops. The biogeochemical give and take among members of the ecosystem up and down the food chains and threaded through all those beautiful symbiotic associations, those that produce diversity and ecological stability, all arising from these principles of reciprocity. And failure to attend to this very basic natural law has had very real consequences, because as we know in all of our work, somewhere along the line, human people have forgotten what our ancestors always knew, that we humans too are all bound by those laws of reciprocity, that we can't take without giving back, that ecosystem services don't flow in just one direction, that we human people are not just takers, but we are givers as well. All of this is embedded in the Indigenous worldview that we say in our way of Jigenogonan, all of my relatives. It's based in systems of kinship. And fundamentally, this covenant of reciprocity that we're going to address this evening is fundamentally, I think, an agreement of justice. It's an agreement and a negotiation of sorts between humans and the land. It's an agreement on which all life depends. And failure to honor that agreement is what has us poised on the brink of climate catastrophe in the age of the sixth extinction. So our hope tonight is that we can gather our minds together around this idea of how could we collectively enact justice for the land? What does it mean as ethnobiologists to be part of the covenant of reciprocity? I want to close for a minute with a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass, and thank you for invoking that book. Who, as ethnobotanists here, who would ever have imagined that everyone will want to read about our work? I'm so proud of all of us. A quote from Braiding Sweetgrass. We are all bound by a covenant of reciprocity. Plant breath for animal breath, winter and summer, predator and prey, grass and fire, night and day, living and dying. Our elders say that ceremony is the way that we can remember to remember. And in the dance of our giveaway ceremony, remember that the earth is a gift that we must pass on just as it was given to us. And when we forget that, the dances that we will need will be for mourning, for the passing of polar bears, the silence of cranes, for the death of rivers, and the memory of snow. Pamela.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ravi. As Daniela has said, so many people throughout the world have been hugely influenced by Robin's concept and scholarship. I, in my own research, have employed the concept of covenants of reciprocity. And of course, it's delightful to be able to talk to Robin and go back and forth and talk about how I've seen it, and then she has been able to help me as well. So in my research, I employ the concept of covenants of reciprocity between humans and certain flavored plant species. And I emphasize that it's not necessarily all plant species, but these deep relationships, these relationships that ethnobotanists talk about are between some species, not all species, even though they may have a positive impact on the rest of the species. These covenants or agreements regulate human-plant relationships in a manner that at once promotes and manages abundance of culturally important plants and plant products within ecosystems that are highly variable in the south, around the Salish Sea region, in Coast Salish group where I work with Sauk Nation. So that is the Salish Sea is in what is now known as BC and Washington State. And I found that the covenants or collaborations with plant species can range from actively managing plants, in what we might call as ethnobotanists as a form of cultivation, and to simply being careful to leave a mature forest alone so that certain plant materials are available whenever required. Like any agreement, these covenants include give and take, the giving of gifts, and acceptance of responsibilities in return. I demonstrate through my research that these covenants between humans and plants rely upon a formalized coordination of understandings and efforts amongst humans to keep up their end of the agreement with plants. And these are reflected in many practices of the Sauk Nation and other Coast Salish groups. In this context, Salish covenants of reciprocity around plants are not brought about by rote inputs to achieve positive outputs, but they're rather a continuous process of becoming in response to shifting external and internal ecological, cultural, and metaphysical factors. The manner in which Sauk and others harvested in the past, and still to some extent today, and managed resources within mature forests reveals a very sophisticated understanding of forest ecology and formal practices to sustainably harvest diverse and rare plant species by working within natural forest succession rather than only arresting succession at a specific stage. So much of straight Salish interaction with plants is better described, I think, as relationships of coaxing plants or persuading ecosystems through relationships of respect and covenants of reciprocity, rather than something that we might call plant cultivation. And these caring relationships in straight Salish territories were governed by their laws, and their laws were governed by values and ethics regarding right relationships among humans, plants, animals, and the supernatural. These bonds with favored plant species are expressed in traditional Sauk and straight Salish identity, economic standards, rules, property, kinship, and laws.
Pamela, thank you for that expansion of how the covenant of reciprocity is not only practiced with the communities that you are learning from and with, but how it informs your research. And that's one of the dialogues that we hope to really create together. I want to take for a minute to give some more context to the work that we all are doing together. You probably already know this, but you know the UN Biodiversity Report of 2019. You maybe you do have it on your bedside table, but it's a heartbreaking read, right? It's going to keep you up at night. It is the report that tragically demonstrates unequivocally the loss of biodiversity over the last decades. It's the report that tells us that 70% of the songbirds have disappeared in 50 years. But in that heartbreaking report, there is a really bright spot, and that is that there are places on the planet where that rate of biodiversity loss is slowed, and in place these islands on the planet where the biodiversity is intact. And you know where those places are, right? The maps of cultural and linguistic diversity map almost one for one onto the maps of biodiversity. It's in Indigenous homelands. Did you know that 83% of the world's remaining biodiversity is in Indigenous homelands? And we have to say, why should that be? Why should that be? And in this time of crisis, we'd better know why that is and see what we can learn in order to avert the crisis which is upon us. It's in the language. It's in a worldview of kinship. It lives in a worldview that says that humans and nature have to flourish together, not separately. All these things that you already know. And so what could we learn? These are places where the covenant of reciprocity is also still intact. And yet most of these vital places are also under constant threat, some of them under threat from well-meaning conservationists as well as exploiters, in violation of any notion of what land justice might look like. So as ethnobiologists, as scholars of ethnobiology, what are the tools that we have collectively that we can deploy on behalf of upholding these oases of thriving cultural and biodiversity? And our hope in this session is to spark a dialogue in response that is kind of a call to action to how do we uphold and enact land justice together. And one of the things that we hope to do together is to imagine and pose questions, stimulate questions that might carry all through the discussions of this week and hopefully out into our shared work and writing and teaching and our advocacy as well. Because as ethnobiologists, well, really just as human beings, we receive so much from plants. Indeed, we take so much from the land. And the covenant of reciprocity asks, how do we address that debt? How might we as ethnobiologists enact plant justice? What would justice for plants look like as emblematic of justice for the land? And I think about this a lot. Honestly, Daniela, I remember you and I talking about these things all those years ago in my office, puzzling our way through this. I don't have the answer. And so that's why I wanted to engage with 4 of the best, most creative thinkers that I know, who think about plants, who think about cultural responsibilities, about Western and Indigenous frameworks of law, who think about justice. And I am so grateful that they are here, that we are here together to think together. And I'm grateful that you are here to think with us. That's really what we wanted to do. And you'll notice that instead of a person on the stage, we are doing a collective keynote, which has some celebration, some elements of celebration and ceremony of remembering to remember a different way of sharing knowledge. And with all gratitude and respect to the Society for Ethnobiology for welcoming this approach and for making it happen. We really appreciate it, because our attention, with all respect, is to disrupt the conventional notion of the keynote, centering an individual authority, a single voice that claims intellectual space, and honor instead the process of collective generation, sharing of knowledge that arises out of deliberation, that arises out of talking together. That's why we have meetings, right? That's why we come together, because we know so much more together than we do alone. And so the 4, really the 5 of us are going to sing harmony instead of solo, which reflects our shared learning about knowledge creation in our lives as researchers, as educators, and thinkers. And our format is derived from the collaborative processes that have been practiced by many traditional Indigenous women's circles, which Lindsay will share about.
Perfect. So I think that many of you will recognize this picture that's up on the screen here, because it is a Zoom square. And this is the great virtual campfire of 2020 through 2022, and it continues to this day. And this is a screenshot that we took of a group of us who gather together every full moon to talk about all things. And this group began a couple of years ago as a space to collaborate, to think about challenging issues, to share about the exciting work that's happening in our different parts of the world, and to celebrate one another. And as we have gathered in this group on Zoom, to think how it felt quite a bit like what I imagine the moon lodges of our ancestors from generations past might have felt as they gathered in space to discuss with one another the important matters that were facing them. And I know in particular for me, having an opportunity to share in this way has really opened my mind. And last night was the full moon. And so we're right on time here with our scheduling here for this conference. I'm sure it was organized around the full moon. And we want to go one slide forward too.
Yeah.
So as Robin mentioned, this collective keynote really grew from these conversations that we've had over the past couple years. And I hope that you can think about the circles of friendships and colleagues and influence that are present in your life as you think about the spaces you'll be moving into over the next 5 days, but also leaving this conference as well, to keep these ideas going and finding these moments of action that each of us can take in our little corners of the world.
Thank you. You know, in keeping with this plant circle that started as a digital campfire, I like the way that you said a digital moon lodge. It's fitting that our 4th participant was going to join us digitally in a video filmed by Pamela. And as it happens, the technology doesn't work for that today. And so we're going to try to represent what our dear friend and your dear friend and esteemed mentor, probably everyone in this room, the great Nancy Turner. And Nancy is a member of our plant circle, and we have been working with her as a team to create this collective keynote. So it's disappointing that you won't be able to hear her voice, but when you see her picture in a minute, oh, can we at least put the beginning of that video up so we can at least see Nancy?
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes.
We won't be able to hear her.
There she is,
There she
smiling.
And what Nancy was saying in this video is to give you all her greetings. As you know, she loves the Society of Ethnobiology, and give you greetings and tell you a little bit about her work in the Pacific Northwest. And we will try faithfully to represent some of what Nancy shared with us in these videos. But I don't think any of us are brave enough to try to give Nancy's raven calls in her absence. We'll try. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but perhaps we could post the whole video presentation on the website so that, yes, thank you, Cassie, so that Nancy, who so much wanted to join us in this way, could do so. And I'll ask both of my plant sisters here to chip in as we go through with what Nancy shared with us. But should we go to the goals slide now?
Yes.
Is it there?
It's right.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today, even if it's only remotely, that it's such a pleasure for me to be with Pamela and Lindsay and my dear friend Wall Kimmerer. And it's really nice to be a part of this big group that we call the Plant Sisters, who have inspired all of us. So I'm an ethnobotanist, and I've been working in British Columbia, learning from amazing Indigenous knowledge keepers, elders, storytellers for over 50 years. And I really would like to acknowledge that I'm here on the territory of the Lekwungen, Coast Salish speaking peoples of the Victoria area, and all of the other Indigenous peoples here in British Columbia I've had the privilege with learning from.
I don't know how that happened. Exactly. The full moon. Nancy has that kind of power, don't you?
She does.
Manifest her power. And so are we to?
We're to the goal.
To goals,
Yeah.
there we go, all right. And the goal then by this collective keynote with the 5 of us, all of whom we will meet in a minute, is to model a process of knowledge sharing that is grounded in the process of deliberation, of what do we learn by back and forth conversation and sharing of multiple perspectives. And in our collective, we are intergenerational, we are international, we are interdisciplinary, we are interkingdom. And through that process of deliberation, we want to think about how do we practice the covenant of reciprocity with our plant relatives to enact plant justice and to catalyze reflection and action among ethnobiologists. You are such a powerful, influential group that in this moment, as Cassie said when we were opening the meeting, the skills that we have, the perspective that we have about relationship between land and culture and values and science, all of this together is exactly the medicine that we need in this moment. And so we hope that these questions are activating. Note that we're giving you primarily questions and not so many answers, but that's where deliberation comes in. So grounded in traditional wisdom and in processes of knowledge sharing from the traditional moon lodges and elsewhere, we're going to begin with a story. We're going to begin with a story and then draw out some of the 4 key principles of justice and reciprocity from that story to illuminate the ways in which we as an ethnobiologist and law community can contribute to the covenant of reciprocity. I also want to say that now that Nancy is with us, we have both 4 and we have a 5th member of our deliberation team who we want to introduce to you. She's right over here, and her name is Rosa. She goes by many different names in all of the different cultures and habitats that she occupies around the world, but always bringing her gifts of medicine, of beauty, of fragrance, of nurture. In a conversation and deliberation that is centering justice for plants, it's important for them to have a seat at the table too. And we know that her voice is a little bit quiet, but this is an audience who can listen to plants. And Lindsay will start us off with the story.
Perfect. So in sharing this following story with you, we might think, what power is there in a story? But we've already heard the many comments thus far around the power of the stories in Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin's book, and I'm sure many of you have important stories that have guided you in your life. And in my work as a lawyer and a law professor, I specifically work in the revitalization of Indigenous peoples' own legal traditions. So of course, prior to colonization, there were societies here that continue to be here who governed themselves according to their own processes of decision-making, deliberation, had their own obligations, rights, processes, and ways of patterning their lives to ensure a certain amount of harmony between one another as both humans and the more than humans with whom they lived on these territories. And I have to say that 4 years ago, the University of Victoria Faculty of Law in British Columbia, Canada, started the world's first ever law degree in Indigenous peoples' own legal traditions. Last year, they graduated their first cohort of students who have these transsystemic skills to go out and practice law, not just in the common law or civil law traditions, but in the many ways of decision-making that have been a part of this continent for many generations. So if we think about how does decision-making and law exist beyond cases, judges, courts, legislatures, parliaments, Indigenous peoples' laws, one of the ways where these laws are contained and passed down is through stories. So this particular story that I'm going to tell you has various names. It's known as The Rabbits and the Roses. It can be called The Year the Roses Died. Sometimes it's called The Case of Bear. And it has many names in Anishinaabe as well. So this was a story that I was told growing up. And it's one that I now tell to my daughters as well in the evening. And we will be drawing out 4 principles from this story and inviting you to think about questions that may be relevant related to these principles for your own work. So the story begins in the distant time when all the animals were able to talk with one another. And it was a time when the roses were one of the most plentiful flowers on the land. They were many different colors and they were so fragrant that when you would just walk around in particular seasons, they permeated the air. And one day, the bears and bees and hummingbirds began to notice that something felt a little bit off, but they weren't too sure what it was. They didn't pay too much attention, in particular, not to the roses, because they'd always been so plentiful and so common. But then one day they did begin to notice that the roses were less and less visible. And as this was happening, the rabbits were a little bit fatter. There's always cycles of abundance and scarcity, so people went on until one day, the Anishinaabe got together and said, you know, the bear's flesh isn't as sweet as it used to be. The bears could not find as much honey. And the Anishinaabe blamed the bears for not being as industrious as they once were. And the bears blamed the bees and hummingbirds for not being as industrious as perhaps they once were. So as the blame was being cast from one person to the one being to the next, there came a summer when finally there were no roses to be found anywhere. So the animals gathered together in a council, as they so often do. They decided that each of the different beings would go out and try and find where, if any, they could spot a rose. So the winged ones went out, the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, the swimmers, each of them in turn, coming back and reporting what they had found. But each time they couldn't find anything until finally, after many moons, the hummingbird came back and said, I found a rose. And so they all followed Rose to the edge of a cliff where they all followed the hummingbird to the edge of a cliff where they found this one last rose just dangling there, hanging on for dear life. And they said, what's happened to you? And the rose said in her weak voice, the rabbits, they've eaten us. All the animals turned to that rabbit and grabbed her short ears and pulled them until they were really long. They punched Rabbit in the nose until it had a little split. They grabbed the hind legs and pulled them back until they protruded and took Rabbit's long, beautiful tail and snapped it off, leaving just a cotton ball tail in its place. And as they were doing this, Nanabush stepped forward and the rose said, wait, it wasn't just the rabbits who were eating us. It was all of you who had a responsibility. And Nanabush, the great trickster, but also a benevolent being, said, you know, we need the roses and the roses need us. They performed their duty to us, but we did not pay enough attention to them. Within our place, everything is dependent on everything else. The loss of even one species inevitably affects the well-being of the rest. The delicate balance between us must be preserved. You can take the life of plants, but you cannot give plants life. And that is how this story ends. So the first principle that we want to discuss here is this idea that plants and animals are living beings with their own wisdom and gifts as demonstrated by the characters in this story. So the question we'd like to pose is, how is the current representation of more than human animacy and personhood achieving justice for our various communities or not? So I believe we can turn to the video now by Nancy reflecting on this question.
I love the story of the roses and the rabbits. There's so many lessons embodied within that story. Of course, there's the direct responsibility that we all have to not to overextend our harvest and to look after things, but we all bear a responsibility to care for everything. We're all part of a big universe of beings. And many of the other stories of the Indigenous peoples that I've learned from also talk about that. Not only do we all have responsibilities, but we all have our own talents. And that is what is reflected in the principle that Robin and the rest of us have kind of designed.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So we wanted to reflect for a moment here on how are these following points on emerging legal avenues contributing to plant justice. So you may have heard of this global rights of nature movement that's taking place across the planet Earth right now in many different jurisdictions, different countries. And the manifestations of this particular movement is varying depending on the country in which it's arising. So I like to think of rights of nature as a legal toolbox. And within that toolbox, we have different approaches available to us. There's the designation of personhood to different natural entities, such as rivers or particular trees or places or lakes. We have the constitutional enshrinement of protections of nature, with constitutions being the highest kind of legal document that's meant to guide a country. And in many Western countries and in different parts of the world, there's a silence across the board on environmental rights within the Constitution. It typically contemplates humans. But we're seeing now nation states are changing their constitutions to reflect the importance of healthy environments for the environment's own sake, but as well as for human rights. And we're seeing an echo of this in tribal constitutions or indigenous constitutions as nations are passing their own kind of written expressions of their people's highest laws. And within that, we have models for how we might articulate a relationship between humans and our other living relatives. So I think that my takeaway from this is it really depends on the context of the country that you're in, how effective this particular avenue is going to be. Philosophically, it's quite lovely, but what legal teeth is it going to have to actually make an impact on the ground? And I think we're seeing really positive examples in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with the Whanganui River and Te Urewera, and how that's had a positive impact there. In Canada, we have not done this much yet. We have not really adopted the global rights of nature movement. At this point, we're taking avenues of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, Indigenous constitutions, co-governance arrangements, and sort of a handful of other legal tools that similarly try and do this work of bringing forward this animacy, recognition of the animacy of these beings. But we have some work to do yet to see how this is going to ripple out and have an impact on our practical day-to-day decision-making. Robin.
I'm so glad that you brought forth tribal constitutions, because that is a place, because under sovereign law, that is a place where these can really take hold, right? As tribal nations decide what to do about defending the legal rights of personhood. I'm thinking about some of the stunning examples of White Earth Ojibwe, who designated in their tribal constitution Monoman, wild rice, as a sacred person, as a legal person. So this was one of the first cases that I'm aware of in plant justice, of plant actually being recognized as having legal standing and legal personhood. And well, what does that mean? If you have legal personhood, that means you can go to court, doesn't it? Legal personhood means you can sue somebody. And so you know what Monoman did as a legal person? Sued the pipeline. Sued the pipeline to say that I have the responsibility, I have the rights to live unimpeded in my wetlands with my Anishinaabe caretakers. These are my rights as a legal person, and that is inspired by this covenant of respect and reciprocity manifest in rights of nature in a tribal constitution. I think about on the border, Tohono O'odham people. Gary Nabhan has written beautifully about this, about the recognition of the Saguaros who were being relentlessly bulldozed for the border wall, that the Tohono O'odham in their tribal constitution said, these are sacred persons. These are sacred persons, and use that as a legal defense to try to stop the destruction of these legal entities. So I'm really excited about the possibilities that plant justice, how it manifests in rights of nature. But I'm also want to say that I'm not entirely sure that legal personhood is the only kind of personhood we ought to be talking about. I have an ongoing conversation with one of my friends, Neil Patterson of the Tuscarora Nation, and he said, well, I get that. Monoman can sue, but what would sugar maple do? Do you think sugar maple would take you to court? And we both just cracked up and said, of course not. Of course she wouldn't. But then that's why we've invited Rosa here. What from the plant's perspective, what does rights of nature look like? What does justice look like outside of these very Western human framed notions of legal personhood? So some things to think about in your own work as well. Do we move on? No, I think we do, right? Yes. Do we have Nancy now again? I think that's our next slide. Sorry, thinking that Nancy wasn't going to be here. I don't have my mind in that place. Yes. Yeah.
I just want to read the wording of the principle number 2 that we had developed as part of the Plant Sisters presentation. We have a collective responsibility to use our gifts to be observant and helpful to all living beings in need, flowing from our obligations as kin. And the guiding question that goes with that principle: what might our world look like if we recenter our obligations to one another as humans and more than humans, instead of being rights focused? And as well as in the principle, we all have our own talents, our own ways of relating, whether we have knowledge or history in, I don't know, astronomy or science of some sort, or whether it's in writing, or whether it's in economics or political leadership. We all have our own talents, and it's up to us to make the best use of those talents. And there's a delightful story about that my dear friend, the late Elsie Claxton, and her friend Vi Williams shared with me many years ago about having one's own talents. And it goes to Swainson's thrush and raven. Swainson's thrush is known up and down the coast here in British Columbia as a salmonberry bird. And in the Saanich language, the song of the Swainson's thrush is actually singing to the salmonberries to make them ripen. And the words are, the song of the salmonberry bird goes to each of the colors of the salmonberry. Come on, all you red ones. Come on, all you dark ones. Come on, all you orange ones. Come on, all you yellow ones. Ripen, 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 ripen. That's what the bird is singing. So this story is about Swainson's thrush and his talents. He invited Raven to his house for dinner, and Raven, who was never one to turn down a dinner, came along, and Thrush handed baskets to his children and sent them off, and then started to sing in his beautiful flute-like voice. Something like that. And after a short while, the children came back. Their baskets were full of all the different colors of salmonberries, and they sat down and had a wonderful meal together. And Raven thought, that looks easy. Why don't you come to my house tomorrow night, he said to Swainson's thrush. So Thrush came along to Raven's house, and Raven handed baskets to his kids, and he sent them off. And then he started to sing. Well, he sang, he sang, he sang. After about an hour, the kids came back and their baskets were empty. And Swainson's thrush had to go home without any dinner. But of course, the lesson of that is we have our own talents. Raven had plenty of talents, but one of them was not his flute-like song. So that's just a good example of a story about that relates to the love of our non-human relatives and what we can do for them.
Could listen forever, couldn't you? And you know, as Nancy in her wonderful way invokes all of the different gifts that we have, it is also a call to action, because in this room, each one of you has different gifts, gifts associated with your professional lives, your personal lives, the work that you're doing, your advocacy, your science, your art. We are in this room, what did she say? The red ones, the orange ones, the dark ones, the yellow ones, ripen, ripen, ripen. You know, it is a call to all of us to to employ our gifts on behalf of this emerging notion of what would justice look like for plants and for land. So thank you, Nancy. Which brings us to our third principle of kincentricity, and the idea, right? Yep, that the suffering of any one species, as Rosa suffered, reflects the suffering of all. That all flourishing is mutual, that we are linked in this exchange of gifts and their coupled responsibilities to them. And so the guiding question then becomes, with these gifts that we have in reciprocity, how might we better support biodiversity as a means of supporting plant justice? And again, thinking about plants as emblematic of land justice and for our more than human kin, because we are bound together with these obligations that really create a framework of justice. And in particular, I think to focus our thinking together in our imaginations, to think about what does plant justice look like in a time of rapid climate change. Since this is a harm which is inflicted by humans, but disproportionately affects our plant relatives. And we know that in some international fora, climate is understood as a human rights issue, right? Deeply affecting our ability to practice our cultures, to even survive, right? And so by parallel, if climate is understood as a human rights issue, is it not also a more than human rights issue? And what does that look like? How do we incorporate that into our work? If we asked Rose, what do you need? What are your rights? What does plant justice look like to you in a time of rapid climate change? And we've talked a little, and I don't pretend to understand or represent fully what she might say, but one of the most important elements that from a plant perspective that we might think about is restoration, is cleaning up the mess that we have made, is healing the damage that we have done that deprives our more than human relatives of their rights to be, right? And this is certainly a way that we can use our unique gifts. And in working in ecological restoration, I think about Daniela, our wonderful work together in ecological restoration, but understanding that, as you said kindly in your opening, you don't have to work in restoration for long to know it's not the land that's broken. It's our relationship to land that's broken. And there lies our gifts, right? How do we heal that relationship to place? So we need to do more than repair ecological damage. We have to repair cultural damage as well, engage in biocultural restoration, indeed work in the field of reciprocal restoration, so that we know as cultures are revitalized and healed, that that's good for the land, and that when the land is healed, that helps cultures flourish, which is why we see that UN report of these biodiversity hotspots, right? Because cultural health and land health are really mutually reinforcing. And so our work as ethnoecologists, ethnobiologists, can be to restore right relationship. But then we say, well, what is right relationship? That's a pretty fraught question, isn't it? But if I could extract one element of right relationship, is that idea of a relationship based in kincentricity, of looking at and being with our more than human relatives as relatives, not as species, not as ecosystem services, and heavens, not as natural resources, but as Jigenogonan, all my relations. And this shift in worldview that I think the more than human world is calling for is a toppling of this fictional pyramid of human exceptionalism, right? That puts human beings at the top top of this pyramid that somehow says that we are in charge, that we are more deserving of all of the rights of and riches of the world than any of the other 200 million species with whom we share the planet. And in discussion with Rose, she asked me to just mention one more facet, and then we'll turn to some more of these ideas as we have time. And she rightly points out that while her people, her Rose people, have many gifts, rapid mobility is not one of them. Thank you for carrying her here. While of course we humans are very good at it, maybe too good at it. And she asks that we bring to the table the notion of assisted migration. That we think about as well. Humans change the climate more rapidly than our plant kinfolk can move, that we give them a hand or a leg or a ride to where they need to be. This notion of moving plants around under the stewardship of their indigenous caretakers is an ancient practice in all of our people. And it's, I think, time that we accept that responsibility again to move them to safe places, to climate refugia, to create climate refugia, create safe places for them. Okay, so it is our responsibility to carry them to safety. And
so I'm going to speak a bit about the last principle that we got from the story of the rabbits and the roses. And that is that problems are complex and we need to look carefully inward and act with thoughtfulness and nuance as we work towards finding the true nature of the problems we face. It is wonderful how so many scholars throughout, from law to ethnobiology and beyond, are really acknowledging that this idea of human exceptionalism or anthropocentrism is unsustainable and not worthy of our continued existence. At the same time, we don't want to fall into a quagmire of anthropomorphism either. So these we don't want to leave you with a sort of a pat easy answer, because yeah, problems are complex. How can ethnobiologists support the challenges of our time, including the need for greater plant justice in the era of climate change? But how can we do that in a way that builds on decades and decades, 100 years or more of research into relationships between humans and plants and humans, humans and other beings, humans and animals as well. And so in my own reflections, as I have gone through my own research and continue to, I'm always thinking about, well, if, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you're in a relationship that's somebody who responds back or something that responds back. It's not like having a relationship with a block of wood. And so in that sense, this is our bailiwick. This is our wheelhouse in ethnobiology. We think about these types of relationships, and this is where I think that we have much to contribute to some of these legal issues and legal understandings in these perspectives, because as ethnobiologists, we're used to dealing with problems associated with participatory action research with Indigenous communities and other or small communities. We just think about the avoidance of appropriation of knowledge, of speaking for instead of with communities we work with, immersing ourselves as apprentices with the communities we work for. I have, when I work with my own students in ethnobotany, I have a class called Apprenticing to Plants, which is, I have not firm answers of how this is done, but I have some suggestions. And of course, students who are always incredibly creative have a lot more of their own suggestions and ways of working with that. But, yet no matter those methodologies, all translate to understanding and translating the issues and needs of working with people. But how do we how do we use some of the understandings we've learned in participatory action research, for example, about working with plants and trying to understand their own perspectives and their own needs? I mean, really, what does the dignity of a plant look like? What is that? What really is that? I struggle with that. And, it's something that I will probably never fully understand, but that is one approach that's being taken in law right now, certainly within animal species, of how do we protect the dignity of animals? Well, how do we protect the dignity of plants, and what does that look like? That's a big methodology issue and a big philosophical, ontological issue as well. And I think that's what we need to start pushing ourselves forward to, getting our minds wrapped around, admitting our limitations. I love and I'm an active follower of the wonderful new scholarship emerging regarding the sentience of plants and plant agency in biology, with people like Monica Galliano and Suzanne Simard, as well as ethnobiologists like Helen Pitt and Leslie Aitchison, who really grapple with how difficult it is to not anthropomorphize plants, not just put words that of human interests in sustainability and what have you into grafting them on, so to speak, onto plants. And so this is, I feel though that as ethnobiologists, we're used to being in this sort of ethical and difficult, complex world of trying to translate and understand differing ways of knowing. Differing ways of knowing amongst people, however, obviously is a cakewalk compared to the different way of knowing that Rosa or these ferns or anybody, any of the other plants have. But I do think we're well poised to engage robustly with these conversations as they apply to plant justice and the protection of habitat for biodiversity. And after all, at the end of the day, I think this is one of the most important things we can do as ethnobiologists, because we teach the people who will become lawyers and park rangers and deputy ministers of the environment. And so we teach the people who are trying to forge new legal and governance frameworks that can acknowledge and support what the wonderful Anna Singh, another favorite of mine, refers to as multi-species living spaces. So that, now I wanted to pass it over to Lindsay, because of course, within that very tall order that I've suggested, there can be some anxiety associated with that.
So I think time is something that's often on our mind here as we think about the task that's ahead of us, where, you know, we hear from this quote from what Robin just mentioned around the biodiversity report from the UN and the just rapid amount of climate change. Time is also with us, where our timekeepers today showed us 2 minutes ago that we have 2 minutes left. In the Anishinaabe language, time is Deba Iganage, and Anishinaabe Mwin is marked for animacy. So different words, you have to say whether or not they're animate or not. And time is a living being. And as we talk today about healing our relationships with various beings, what if time is also a relation with whom we need to foster a healthier relationship? And we think here about the task before us. Do we want to be in a state of crisis and emergency? And what kinds of decisions and actions flow if we're coming from that space, versus if we take a moment to say, hey, time, who are you? How do you connect with me? How do you connect with this issue? And is that enough to shift us into a space where we might be able to work more productively?
Thank you. And we will, yes, please. And we'll, I think we have to move past that. Yeah.
Probably.
And yes, we do. Yeah. And so, in closing, let's begin our closing with perfect. Okay.
So Tonight we have engaged with the stories and teachings from Rosa, from Monoman, from Saguaro Cactus, from different more than human beings. And this is a reminder that we're surrounded by so many intelligent beings who we can look to as our teachers. And we can find examples in the earth around us for how we might pattern our own lives and communities moving forward. So this isn't a task that we're alone with. As mothers, we recognize that we are also being mothered by the earth, and that there are teachings there that we can turn to. And stories invite us into this kind of cultural biomimicry.
I'm imagining that this evening we honestly haven't told you anything that you didn't already know, but our elders tell us that our job is to remember with mind, body, emotion, and spirit. But I want to close by saying that it's not enough in these times to only remember old stories. In fact, old stories of human exceptionalism and the land as our property are some stories that we need to forget. We are also called to make new stories, because we are not only storytellers, we are story makers. And how could we collectively nurture a new story of kinship with our more than human relatives, of justice, of the covenant of reciprocity? We'll just close with a very quick reading. The moral covenant of reciprocity calls us to honor our responsibilities for all we have been given, for all we have taken. It's our turn now, long overdue. Let us hold a giveaway for Mother Earth. Spread our blankets out for her and pile them high with gifts of our own making. Imagine the books, the paintings, the poems, the clever machines, the compassionate acts, the transcendent ideas, the perfect tools, the fierce defense of all that has been given to us. Gifts of mind, hands, heart, voice, and vision, all offered up on behalf of the earth. Whatever our gift, we are called to give it. And I will close with the words of a wonderful mentor of mine, the late Audrey Shenandoah, clan mother at Onondaga Nation. And she said, our job as people is to seek justice. Justice not only for ourselves, but justice for all creation. Miigwech Mizindawiyag. Thank you for listening. That's mine, isn't it?
Wow. Thank you so much. Robin, I do need to tell you that I'm over here.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, I have both your books as an audio, and I have listened to them many, many, many times. Usually in my 2 forests. I have 25 acres of forests in Atlanta that I am the caregiver for. My question is about invasive plants, and I have asked my volunteers to stop referring to them as invasive plants because they're not, they're introduced. We now call them exotics. And I've noticed the last year that I have started feeling guilty about tearing these plants that are there through no fault of their own. But I feel that I am required to do that. So I guess my question is, how do I grapple with that?
The answer I like to give to that is while I'm pulling garlic mustard in the woods, I have a lot of time to think about that. um, and I do think a lot about it. And I really honor your switch from saying that these are, invasive to wait, who brought them here? And I take very seriously the teachings that have been shared with me that of plants as persons and as teachers, and that they know what they're doing. They've come here for a reason. And to have the knee-jerk reaction, as so many in the conservation community do, just get rid of it. It's not native. I find that such an interesting perspective. Right. Rather to think about, like, for us, Phragmites is a terrible wetland species that overtakes our native wetland plants. But why is it here? Because our native cattails, we've put so much phosphorus into the water that our native cattails can't take it up, right? So maybe Phragmites is here to clean up our mess. Let's first inquire. Let's take Ed Vicendo and let's take humility before these plants to say, why are you here? What are your gifts? What are your responsibilities? Before we start ripping them up and poisoning the land in order to get rid of them. But as I say, I think about this while I'm pulling garlic mustard. And the negotiation that I have with garlic mustard, for example, is that I say, you can have the ditches, you can have the hedgerows, you can have all those spaces that were made by the people who brought you here, but you may not have my trillium woods. And so it's a negotiation. It's a negotiation, and that I draw on our teachings that human beings' job is to make balance, and so that's how I try to think of it. But I want to always engage them with humility first and see, why are you here? What are you bringing us? Yeah. Anybody else?
Hi, thank you for the talk. My question is about maybe the fact that ethnobotany is still a living tradition. We think about ethnobotany sometimes as a thing of the past or something in the historical record, but it's something that's still happening today. People are still interacting with the plants around them. And in America, what that means is that plants that started as being used solely by Native Americans are now used well outside their original anthropological range. And so the plant that I study is a medicinal plant, Monotropa uniflora, or Indian pipe or ghost pipe. And I think it's really fascinating. But I've had this angst of as I investigate it, of I'm studying, and I'm studying both the chemistry and the ethnobotany of this plant, and it has its roots in native traditional knowledge, but as ethnobotany keeps up with the current society, it's now used by people across the United States from multiple different ethnic heritages and ethnic lineages. And so I've gotten this question, and I haven't been able to come up with a satisfying answer to it yet, of like, what do I do about knowledge sovereignty, or like honoring the traditions that this plant came from, while investigating this plant that has now evolved or grown into something that is harvested and used and appreciated by now a wider range of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does. And I'm glad that you're honoring that question simply by asking it, right? Because oftentimes what I think there's been a long tradition in ethnobotany, and fortunately it is diminishing, of that notion of what I call knowledge mining, of, dipping into native cultures to take out the pieces that fit our needs, our worldview, our epistemology, and casting the rest aside, right? And so to say, well, I'm going to find out what is the active ingredient in monotropa and leave the stories behind, leave the honorable harvest behind, leave the personhood of monotropa behind. And so I think that the things that we've been talking about here apply. There are justice issues, there are knowledge justice issues, right? Of who has control over that knowledge, who gets to make those decisions. And I want to, in all seriousness, say, have you asked monotropa? What would monotropa do? And that you've given us a really great example of just what we're trying to sort of catalyze is to think about these from the perspectives of plant justice. You want to add anything from, is there another perspective? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I turned my mic off. So can I grab
Yes,
this
of
one?
course.
Okay. Something that brings up for me is this idea that when we think about knowledge of a particular Indigenous nation related to a plant across any area, I think we need to remember that Indigenous peoples themselves have been learning from neighboring nations. So the Anishinaabe maybe learned about Monoman partially from Haudenosaunee, or the Blackfoot might have learned from the Blood, or the New Hawk from the Heiltsuk. And so there's this sense of there's constantly intercultural exchanges happening. And I don't think there's ever sort of a pure moment in time where you're learning about one particular culture's way of doing things. It's like we're always woven, we're always flowing together. And so in that sense, it kind of opens me up to think about this as we're constantly engaging in an international way. And that helps me to live this phrase that I've often heard, which is jam is for preserving, traditions are for living. This sense that, we're always flowing, intermingling, interconnecting, we're messy, there's beauty in the mess of compost and what life can grow from that too.
Good words.
Mm-hmm.
Well, join me in thanking our speakers again. This was really beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. We have an exciting evening ahead of us. First of all, please do take a stop at our university bookstore. They have a table set up with some of Robin's books, and she will be here at the table to sign your copies, which I know I'm very eager to get an autographed copy of her books, which I love so much. And then for all of you that are regular conference delegates, these are folks that have your registration badges. You have an amazing band, appetizers, drinks with your free drink tickets, and dinner over in the Emory Student Center. So grab your books, get them signed, and then head over to the party. It's the Emory Student Center that is